I'm Julie Enslow, one of the facilitators for Local 350, and welcome to everyone. We've had quite a week with this extreme that hit the southern part of our country, and it really is a picture of things to come, I'm afraid. Michael Mann was on Democracy Now! Yesterday, and he said this isn't a natural disaster that happened. This was a result of human-caused climate change. It was a man-made disaster. And of course, over 220, let's see, there were 7 miles was the length of one of those tornadoes that hit down, 30 tornadoes coming through there. And so many people have died. I think I saw 120 or so of those they found dead so far, and they're still searching. So this was an interesting mix of things Michael Mann talked about, of how it was a mix of the jet stream. It was slowing down and meandering and cutting down into the Midwest, the central part of the country, at the same time that this very high humidity weather system was coming up off the Gulf. And the Gulf is very warm now. And so the storms have picked up a lot of moisture. And when the two collided over Kentucky and Indiana and Illinois and Tennessee and those areas, it created what they called supercell thunderstorms, which is a whole series and a whole row over a long area of continuous thunderstorms that can then turn into all of these tornadoes and feed into these tornadoes. So this is something that we unfortunately are going to see more of with the global warming and the climate change. So the one good thing that I heard in the last few days was really that the Extinction Rebellion activists in England had 6 of them on trial in London. And for the first time, climate activists were acquitted by a jury, unanimously by this jury, in less than an hour in this courtroom in London, because they totally agreed with the actions of these climate activists. And they had used the necessity plea for their defense, and the jury agreed. So that was a really good precedent that was set for future law cases that result from the climate actions.
They were lucky to have Horace Rumpole representing them.
Oh, yes. Then one thing else that's happened is that an analysis came out yesterday, I believe it was, that the Biden administration has approved more oil and gas drilling permits on public lands in just this past year than Trump did in all 4 years. That he is talking on both sides of his mouth. One is deep concern about climate change, and on the other, continuing with these drilling permits on public lands. And some of those had been agreed to before he came into office, but others have not. They're new ones, and they could be ordered through his office to be stopped, and that's not happening. So we've really got to get on Biden's case. Also, the struggles for the Line 3 and Line 5 are both in continuous process. Line 3 and Line 5 pipelines are both flowing with oil. Line 3 did open up a couple of months back after all those struggles to try to stop it. And Line 5 was closed down for about a day or so because the governor of Michigan had shut it down with her concern about its passage onto the Great Lakes. But it got turned on again, and there's, of course, this includes agreements with Canada, and Canada is very pro fossil fuels and pipelines. And of course, Enbridge is a Canadian company that is building the Line 3 and Line 5. The Corps of Army Engineers is now being appealed to for an environmental impact study, once again for line 3. So we'll see where that goes. There were demonstrations around the country today, and all of the Army Corps of Engineers offices, including there was something happening in Madison today. And then here in Milwaukee, we continue with our Chase Bank actions every Friday. And we are really kind of happy to found a new location that isn't quite as cold and windy, and it's a very good location. It's on the corner of Silver Spring Drive up in Whitefish Bay and Lydell. And right there is this brand new Chase Bank right on the corner with terrific public access, sidewalks going around it right up to the front door that are public. And we have a lot of traffic going by and a lot of new signage and a lot of new people out on a regular basis. Each Friday, we've been there 2 weeks now, and we'll be there again this Friday. And it's water in Wisconsin. It has a lot of construction going on at this point. We'll stick with the Silver Spring Drive location for the foreseeable future until you would hear differently from us in our 350 newsletter. So I hope that you can join us. It's not as cold. It's a lot more fun. We find it's a good place. So perhaps some of you would like to give it a try. And right now, Michael Komba is with us. And Michael is a staff person at House of Hospitality. And he has a long history of activism and getting arrested for anti-war, anti-nuclear issues. And he is planning to do an action this week at one of the Chase banks. And Michael would like to talk to you about this. Michael, can you come on?
Sure. Yeah. So I plan to do, like Julie said, a civil disobedience act on Winter Solstice, which is Tuesday, the 21st, next Tuesday after, or next Tuesday, yeah. I plan to go inside the Chase Bank downtown right at 12 noon. I'm gonna go in with my sign. I'm gonna hide it at first because I've been told you can't get in with a sign by other 350 people. So I'm gonna hide it in, and I'm gonna take it out inside the bank. And I plan to protest inside the bank and read a statement that I had prepared if they allow me to do it before I get arrested, which I think I'll have time. Of course, I'm taking a vow of nonviolence. I have an N95 mask I'm gonna be using. I'm socially isolating afterwards, taking a COVID test and all that to be extra safe. If anybody wants to get arrested with me, that'd be great. I totally understand that it's kind of an acquired thing. I like getting arrested for protests, so I know it's not everybody's thing. But otherwise, there's 2 ways that I'd request that if people are interested in kind of supporting the action, because I feel like if more people are there, just their presence, not getting arrested, but just being there, it'll have a bigger impact. One is to protest outside after I go inside. After I go inside the building, people could protest if somebody's willing to bring signs. If people are interested. The other thing is anybody who is interested or willing, if they want to come inside, I'll go in first. Lincoln from Costa Maria is going to come in after me. He's going to take pictures or a video. So if people want to come in after Lincoln without signs, just to come into the building, not inside the bank, unless you feel compelled to, of course, and want to talk to people, but just to come in, just be a witness to the action, because I feel like that'll kind of multiply the impact and just show that it's not just one weirdo protesting inside the bank. If people are interested in doing that, no pressure though. I mean, I know everybody has different comfort levels. And I learned recently that Toronto350.org is taking part in a conference call right now at the same time as we're doing our meeting. They're having a conference call to help organize actions against the Coastal GasLink pipeline. It's being funded by JP Morgan Chase. The Wet'suwet'en people in Canada are fighting against the pipeline. It's cutting through their tribal land. They and other water protectors have called for a week of action against JP Morgan Chase starting December 20th. And I learned about this after I already picked this day for an action because it's winter solstice. But so our action would fit in well with their day of action, or the week of action, I mean. So I feel like focusing on this Canadian pipeline is a good focus. Since the line 3 and 5 are already funded, I feel like this might be a good focus for this action specifically. So I added that to my sign, and I'm gonna add it to my statement. So I don't know, I've been arrested, like Julie said, many times before. So I think it'll go well. I mean, I've never had an issue. It's always been very nonviolent. I mean, the only reason I could see not wanting to stay till I get arrested. If they like say security tries to physically remove me, I wouldn't want them to hurt themselves, of course. Or if someone inside starts acting very erratic and I feel like it might lead to violence, I would probably just leave, just because I think nonviolence is very important. So yeah, that's my spiel.
Can you tell us once again the time?
Sure.
And it's on the 21st, which is what day of the week?
It's a Tuesday, the 21st. Yep, Winter Solstice. So I'm going to go in right at noon, and then Lincoln's probably going to wait about 15 seconds and come in after. He's going to pretend like he's not with me and just so he can like get good pictures and or a video. So yeah.
Terrific.
And Tom Siri said he'll be my lawyer, so I'm very thankful for him. Yeah.
And which bank is this?
The one downtown, JP Morgan Chase, the one we're usually picking at. Yep.
On water in Wisconsin.
Right. Yep, water in Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's on Tuesday, the 21st.
Yep.
Any other questions?
21st, you're right. Yeah, 21st, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Michael? All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for taking this initiative. And it's good you were with us for lots of our work in the past, and it's good to have you back in the thick of things.
Michael, what sign are you planning on taking?
I made a sign that says Chase, #1 funder of fossil fuels, and then hashtag about defund coastal gas link. That's the hashtag they're asking people to use. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good. So Tom Siri and I could probably bring down some signs for people who want to join us down there in support of Michael. Well, I guess that I won't be there in support of you, just in my heart.
Yeah.
So,
Bruce and I will probably be there to witness.
Good. Good.
And Jan and I plan on being there.
So, Michael, the other question I was going to have, are you going to have some other observers, legal observers? The last time this group was involved in something like that, there were a couple of ministers from the United Church of Christ who I don't know that they got to stay inside all the way through the arrests, but they were inside and observing as well, and had their collars looking very ministerial. So I don't know if there's any method in having somebody that would be the legal observer, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I don't know. I can reach out to different people and see. I don't know who those ministers are, but I could try.
I know who they are, and I can probably recruit one for you if you want. So let's talk later.
Sweet. Sounds good.
Okay, good. Sounds good.
I plan on being there too.
Yeah, I probably will be there as well.
Excellent.
And what's the time again? Noon?
Noon is when I'm going in, yeah. So maybe you get there a few minutes.
Okay.
Terrific. Sounds like we have a plan.
We do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is someone going to be there taking pictures?
Yeah, Lincoln is from Casa Maria, yeah.
Okay.
Lincoln Rice. Well,
Okay, good.
good. Well, is there anything else that anyone needs to bring up right now before we go on with our speaker for the night?
Yes, Julie.
Okay.
I just, in the past, we've talked about the networks and they're identifying climate change. And with this extreme tornadoes on the ground for 3 or 4 states, every network has identified it in terms of the connection to climate change. I think that's really important. And we might want to think about a public education program in the libraries coming up this winter, given the pandemic, but somehow begin doing more education work now that it can become a household name. Thank you.
Great suggestion, George.
What kind of education campaign? Posters or speakers?
Speakers.
Speakers?
I would think speakers that, there's the libraries often have programming. Senior centers have programming, and they are always looking for speakers. So to come in and do something on the connections between these extreme weather patterns that we're seeing and climate change might be something that they would respond to and really want to know more about.
Sure, and you could do videos plus speeches, lectures.
Well,
yes.
If I might, Julie,
yes.
With this pandemic and all of our apprehensions, we might want to do a flyer campaign with links to PowerPoints that we have in terms of really explaining climate change, as opposed to something in person. But if we could flood the libraries with those flyers and the link to our website and the videos, I think that would be a big step.
What do people think? I think there's locations that we could get into easily. Anybody have suggestions?
I live in Franklin. I'm thinking either the Franklin or the Oak Creek Public Library might be good. I know the Franklin Library has display windows. I don't know. I have not been in the library there in a long time, so I don't even know if people are going there a lot at this point. Yeah.
Well, libraries like events that bring people to the library and introduce them to the library. So we recently had Dr. Michael Mann, of course, over at the Whitefish Bay Library, and that was very successful.
Also, the Franklin Library has been having every year in February, they have a series on, it's not the United Nations, it is, I'll have to find it, but we have a book and we study the world on different issues, and we have speakers come in. And last year we had it on Zoom because the library was closed, pretty much closed. But I don't know if there's even going to be if they're going to do it again, but yeah, speakers at the library, it's a good idea.
Yeah, this is Bruce. Yeah, speakers is one thing. You got to schedule them ahead of time and get the room and get it approved and all that stuff. So that's just logistics. I had occasion not too long ago to take some flyers around to all the libraries about an event for this city-county task force, and anything posted or handed out in the library, like flyers, had to be approved by the librarian in charge there. And they looked at it quite closely. And this was an event sponsored by the city, so it was no problem getting approval to post things, but they get inundated with different groups wanting to hand out flyers and post them and stuff like that. So it's a little more complicated going that route, unless you're just going to stand in front of the library and hand them out to people coming in and trying to have a dialogue. So all that needs to be thought through and investigated. It's a good idea, George. It just needs to be worked out.
You could actually just go through the central library and take a whole stack of the things there, and they'll distribute them to the individual libraries also. If they just approve them centrally, and then it goes out to everybody.
What they told me was that they would, when I took it to the central library, they would give one flyer to each of the libraries to post.
That works well for posters. You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
More on advertising. Patch, I noticed just today has a new event area in all their editions, the Milwaukee edition, the Wauwatosa edition, and it seems very much easier to do publicity about some of this stuff now. All you gotta do is just go on Patch. If you're already looking for local news on Patch, it's very easy to find. But I have emails from them that I could forward to you guys that'll show you how to do it. And I looked at it today, the instructions are right there and you just go do it.
Okay, thanks. Why don't you,
Stack.
yeah, I haven't heard. It's, could you send us the link to that?
Well, George Stack, please.
George.
Since I started this conversation, and it's gone further than what we all imagined, and we know that education is the greatest tool of activists. I think we should initiate an education committee to bring back a recommendation in terms of how to do this. I'm hearing a lot of things that are conflicting. Myself, I don't see personal presentations during a pandemic in the library. Okay, but that's my feeling about it. But I think a committee should sift this through and come out with something very concrete in terms of some form of a campaign that we can support that is safe. Thank you.
Is that a motion to establish an education committee?
Yes.
Second.
All right, George, did you second it, George Stone?
I did, yes.
Okay. So are there any discussion about forming this communications committee to specifically focus on, well, whatever, actually, the climate change issue?
This will be informally known as the George Committee.
Okay.
I would think that you could have it on Zoom through the library. We have had Zoom, a lot of Zoom presentations through the library. And there's also, I think it's called the Intercontinental Library, which is in Missouri, but they have presentations that they have people from all over the US listening in, and the ones I was on were musical presentations, but on climate, they're pretty open to speakers too. So I think some Zoom presentations might work.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a
Time
thought.
check.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to serve on this committee to start to just come up with a concrete plan and proposal? Jean, would you be willing to? You seem to have a lot of good ideas here.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I would be willing to talk to a couple of librarians.
Okay.
But, or just talk to people here first and see what we want to do.
Let's just get some names right now. Let's just get some names of people who might be interested in working on more outreach and communications.
How about the other Gene, Eugene Barufkin from my neighbor in Tosa?
Is there anyone else who would like to pursue this issue?
Since I brought it up, I would like
Yeah.
I would like to convene a meeting regarding it.
Okay.
Put my name down. Patricia Sumnick.
Pat.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to help out as well.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Okay, at this point, we've got George Stone, George Martin, Gene Seeger, Pat Sumnick, and Charlie Bensinger. Sounds like a committee to me. Let's go on. Let's go to our speaker for the evening. The big event over the last couple months, of course, was the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, where a couple of hundred countries sent representatives. And many of them, well, there are many countries that weren't able to get representatives there, which was too bad because of COVID restrictions, travel restrictions, vaccination restrictions, visa problems, a lot of visa problems to get into Scotland. And so it ended up being much more of a lopsided conference than in the past. Well, George Stone, our speaker tonight, has a history of attending a lot of these conferences in the past, a lot of these COP conferences around the world. And his background, of course, is a professor at Milwaukee Area Technical College, and his area of expertise really has been this whole issue of climate for the last several years and global warming. And we've been very lucky to have him as part of our group. So periodically, he gives us his point of view of what's happening on a global level, and his state of the world presentation each spring has always been really enlightening. This particular talk tonight is going to be focusing more on what happened at the COP26. So George Stone, would you please proceed?
Thank you for the kind introduction, Julie. This week, of course, saw an historic outbreak of tornadoes. Particularly hit hard was Kentucky and about 5 other states as well. This is unusual, very unusual, because first of all, it was in December. And severe, let alone super outbreaks, as outbreaks of this kind are called, in December are unheard of. I mean, extremely rare, if ever recorded. It was also unusual in the severity of it. The assessment of the type of tornado, the strength of the tornadoes has not yet been completed, but it's known that many of them were F3. That's the Fujita scale, which is kind of comparable to, well, it's the scale that's used for ranking the amount of energy, the intensity of tornadoes. 3 is very strong. I think 155 or 100 mile-an-hour winds, that's hurricane force, category 5 hurricane force. And then F4, Fujita scale 4, or EF, enhanced Fujita scale, they call it now, is even stronger, strong enough to blow buildings apart. And then the F5 tornadoes are 200 miles an hour winds, and they'll blow down anything. And it's suspected that a number of these, and by the way, the number of tornadoes identified has now been doubled up to 60. The number of those that are F3 and above is unusually high. In other words, this was a very energetic and violent series of tornadoes. What I've decided to do tonight, I'm going to give a very brief summary of the results from COP26 up in Glasgow, Scotland. But I'm going to spend most of the time talking about this historic tornado outbreak, what it means with regard to climate change, and how we can use it and should use it as leverage to get the climate change provisions in the legislation passed. So that's what I'm going to focus my attention on. My background at MATC, I'm a geologist. I always say stone's the name, rocks are my game. But at MATC, I also taught introductory meteorology, course called Weather Fundamentals. And I developed a course called Climate Change Fundamentals, which I also taught. So I do have a significant background. I was at the University of Oklahoma for my first teaching career. I had tenure there as an associate professor of geology and geophysics. And the University of Oklahoma at that time, and still, is known for the quality and size of its meteorology department. And in fact, Norman, Oklahoma, where it's located, was chosen some 50 years ago to be the location of the National Severe Storm Laboratory, because it was kind of at the center of tornado locations in the country. And so they were very well known for their meteorology, and I took a significant interest. But in any case, I'm going to comment on this most recent tornado outbreak after a summary of COP26. I didn't go to COP26. I had planned to, but then COVID came along and I really stopped going to conferences altogether. I'm 85 years old. I'm highly vulnerable in terms of age, although I'm in good health. So I just decided not to increase my risk by going to conferences. And I continue that now. Hopefully next year it'll feel safe enough to start traveling more again. But in any case, and Michael Mann, who was recently in town, was a key delegate there. And I've heard from him and read some of his summaries. So I feel as though I'm reasonably well informed about the conference. I was, as Julie mentioned, I have gone to many previous conferences, including the conference in Paris, where the Paris Accord was signed 5 years ago. Eileen, my wife Eileen, and I went to that and enjoyed it very much. Well, COP26 in Glasgow. You can find assessments of this conference that ranged all the way from kind of Pollyanna, rose-colored glass, optimistic, to extremely pessimistic and negative responses. I'll give you the point of view of the science community as I understand it. And I've communicated with Dr. Mann on this. It's been such a long haul. I mean, I've personally been lecturing about the dangers of global warming for at least 3 decades. Jim Hansen, the great climate scientist from NASA, testified before Congress in 1988. I believe it was August of 1988, and warned about his computer projections showed that the climate was going to warm significantly due to the accumulation of greenhouse gases. And he warned that this is going to cause all kinds of negative and costly and deadly impacts, and among them sea level rise, for example, not to mention severe storms. Well, that got my attention. That really got me, and I started focusing on that as one of the main subjects I concentrated on in my teaching of earth science and geology. And then, of course, when I came to MATC, I took over the meteorology course and developed my own climate course. And because I felt this is such an important issue. And I feel strongly that scientists, as well as all other scholars in the specialty fields, owe a responsibility to the public to keep them informed about issues that may be of concern. I mean, after all, the public supports us, including the highest paid research professors. So anyway, let me return to COP26. I'm going to read Michael Mann, along with I have to get the right paper here. Along with a colleague, Susan Hassel is her name. Michael Mann and Susan Hassel published an op-ed in the LA Times. This was a month ago, right after the conclusion of the COP26 meetings in Glasgow. The title, the headline the LA Times put on this was Dr. Michael Mann, don't give in to the purveyors of despair. COP26 was a beginning, not an end. Well, that's pretty much my attitude too. We've come decades trying to get the public informed, trying to get politicians to behave responsibly regarding this issue. It's been such a long haul. And so now we've got the whole world coming together. It was unfortunate that this conference was scheduled and seriously disrupted by COVID. And so the attendance wasn't what it would have been or what it will be next year. That's one of the key results from COP26, that the 200 countries that Julie mentioned, they agreed to meet again, not in 5 years, but next year. COP27 will be next year in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And I think it's hoped to get the attendance to, first of all, be past COVID and all of its ill effects, but also to get the attendance jacked up and to the full 200, and provide financial assistance to those countries who find difficulty in affording to come to the conference, because we want everybody represented there. After all, it's the poor countries, especially the Southern Hemisphere countries populated by people of color, that are suffering the most, one can argue, from these impacts of global warming. So here I'm going to read a few excerpts from this op-ed piece by Michael Mann and Susan Hassel. For those looking for reasons to be cynical about the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland, COP26, there seemed to be more than ample cause early on. Yet for those looking for hope, grounds for this too emerged later. The final COP26 decision statement, for the first time in any COP agreement, contains language directing all nations to increase efforts toward phasing down unabated coal and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, though it gives no firm deadlines. Well, they can be added next year. I mean, there are a lot of things that weren't done at COP26, but they're going to meet again next year. This is an ongoing process. As Dr. Mann said, regard this as a beginning, not an end. The biggest breakthrough was unexpected. On Wednesday, now that would have been November 2nd because the conference started on Sunday, Halloween, October 31st. But the biggest breakthrough was unexpected. On Wednesday, China and the US, the world's two largest climate polluters, said they would commit to, quote, enhanced climate actions, unquote, to keep global warming to the limits set in the Paris Agreement. This level of US-China cooperation quickly shifted the entire COP26 narrative and outlook. And so those are excerpts from Dr. Mann's op-ed piece in the LA Times. I can also tell you now, our co-chair, our coordinator or facilitator, Julie Enslow, wrote a piece in our newsletter and was expressing a rather extreme disappointment at what wasn't done at the COP conference. Well, I understand that. I mean, expectations were high, but I think they were unrealistically high. And when you have the perspective of some of the scientists who've been working on this for decades, we're moving along. We're getting someplace finally. And we're not nearly where we need to be, but we're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and we're going to make progress each time. So I look at it as the glass half full. And I'm with Dr. Mann and many of the other climate scientists on that score. Bill, well, I think I'll skip him for a moment. That's kind of the general result. And the hopeful thing is that they are going to make a lot of progress and a lot of agreements, but not nearly enough and not nearly what we really wanted. So, but it's, as again, I remind you, the recurring theme of this report is parallel with Dr. Mann. This is a beginning, not an end. Now, the tornadoes. As Julie reported from Dr. Mann's appearance on the Democracy, climate scientists and meteorologists with longer perspective, see, I'm a geologist, I have a long perspective, generally agree. Certainly, storms of the kind that produce tornadoes require a tremendous amount of energy and a tremendous amount of moisture and warmth and heat, and global warming enhances all those conditions. As the temperatures, the atmospheric temperatures warm, and let's analyze the planet Earth into its three principal components: atmosphere, hydrosphere, which is the oceans and all the water, including frozen water, glaciers, and of course the lithosphere, or the land and the continents. These three major components, well, the atmosphere and the hydrosphere are gases and liquids and have the ability to flow, and they have the ready ability to respond to pressure changes, and they move around. And that's what produces our weather and our longer lasting climate. People always ask, well, what's the difference between weather and climate? Well, you call your friend who just moved down to Tucson and you say, how's the weather? Oh, it's hot, it's dry, it's about 100 degrees out and 10% humidity, it's hot and dry. And oh, I see. Well, I'm thinking about moving down there. What's the climate? Hot and dry. Well, that means it's you know, on a year-round basis. Climate is long-term, weather is short-term, to be concise. Okay, what happens? How do tornadoes form? Let me give a little Now, I appreciate Julie's venture into meteorology earlier. Let me expand on that a little bit. Warm air, of course, is lower in density and rises. Its rise can be accelerated if it's pushed. What happened? The conditions that produce tornadoes, which result from wind shear, are those that accompany a storm system or a major low pressure area that moves from west to east across the continent, the middle part of the continent, following what's often called the Colorado Tract. No, the Alberta Clippers, or the weaker storms that come down from Western Canada, those do not incorporate enough Gulf moisture and warmth to produce really severe storms and tornadoes. But the storms that come out of the Southwest and go diagonally northeast across the country, they suck up enormous amounts of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Remember, and the Gulf of Mexico right now is warmer than it's ever been. I mean, surface temperature is over 80, lots of evaporation, tremendous amount of moisture in the atmosphere. That's why it's so humid along the Gulf Coast. And that around a low pressure system, a storm center, the circulation, of course, is counterclockwise. So as the storm center passes eastward across the continent, the airflow behind it comes down from the north. And that's cold, dense air, colder, dense air, which swings around the south side of the storm center and encounters that warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. And it acts kind of like a snowplow. The cold air, being denser, heavier, hugs the ground and pushes the warm, moist air out of the way upward. And of course, the warm air expands. It wants to go upward anyway, lower density. As that warm, moist air, and it has the two ingredients necessary for severe thunderstorms and tornadoes, high temperature and a lot of moisture. And as that warm, moist air rises, it expands because the air pressure is lower up above. And as it expands, it cools, adiabatic cooling. And as it cools, the humidity, the relative humidity goes up to 100%, and the air starts to condense. And this produces clouds and ultimately precipitation. And when it condenses, it releases the latent heat of vaporization. In other words, the heat that it took up in order to become a gas. And that heat is the energy source for these storms. And the movement of the air is due to differences in pressure. One simple rule to remember: fluids flow from high to low. Air moves from areas of high pressure to areas of lower pressure. Well, in amongst the system where the cold air is coming around the low pressure center and pushing the warm, moist air south of the storm center upward, this creates a series of thunderstorms along in advance of the cold front. And this is called a squall line, squall like a storm. And the squall line, well, this was an extreme squall line that was produced earlier in the week that produced all these tornadoes. And a tremendous amount of uplift and expansion. And now what causes the tornado itself? We understand what causes the precipitation. The tornado, if you remember when you were a kid in school working with modeling clay, and if you wanted to make a log cabin or a log, you took a little piece of clay and moved it back and forth between your hands in a shearing motion. The two hands are moving in opposite directions, that's a shear. And it rolls the clay into a log, right? Same thing happens with the air. If you got air shear, wind shear, it's called, it can produce rolling columns of air. And in this environment of rising air due to the advancing cold front pushing warm, moist air up, some of those shear funnels may get sucked vertically and they turn into tornadoes. And this is a general explanation of how tornadoes form. But the environment in which they form is one in which there's abundant heat and moisture, and then the condensation of that moist air, of the water vapor in the air, releases even more energy and heat. And that's what happened. Now I want to talk briefly, there were about an earlier tornado experience that I had when I was teaching at the University of Oklahoma. as I said before, Oklahoma was, Norman was kind of a center for tornado research. The other center was at the University of Chicago under Professor Ted Fujita. And Professor Fujita, Dr. Fujita is the man for whom the ranking scale for tornadoes is named, the EF scale or effective Fujita scale. But Norman, a lot of tornado research, severe storm laboratory there. And I was a young, that was a long time ago, associate professor of geology and geophysics in the School of Geology and Geophysics at the University of Oklahoma. You know, OU, that's the university where we worked very hard to produce a university that the football team would be proud of. Well, anyway, I got really interested in meteorology. April 3rd, 1974. I had joined the faculty there in 1964. So it was my 10th or 10th year at OU. Conditions were just right for a severe tornado outbreak, or a super outbreak, as we call it. And that happened on the 3rd and 4th of April. 319 people were killed. Now, the latest total I've heard from this week's outbreak is 88, but over 100 people are unaccounted for. So it could be much higher. But back in 74, 319 people. There were 148 tornadoes identified. About a third of them were F4s and F5s, extraordinarily strong, perhaps the strongest tornado outbreak recorded. And the remarkable thing about this, and one town that I always associate with this was Xenia, Ohio. Just got clobbered, very much the way Mayfield, Kentucky has been this time around. Xenia, Ohio. Well, there are many other towns. The remarkable thing was there were 3 separate squall lines, not just one major squall line along which the thunderstorms built up and developed tornadoes, but 3 separate squall lines, each one maybe 500 miles east of the previous. Now, I got the idea, I wanted to write a book about this event. And I went up to Kansas City to the National Weather Service's Forecast Center. Alan Pearson was the director, and he was very generous and gave me some of his time. And he showed me satellite photographs that showed 3 separate lines of clouds, 3 squall lines existing simultaneously, moving eastward across the southeast part of the country. That's what produced 148 tornadoes and 319 did. Perhaps the most severe tornado outbreak on record. But that's how rare this is. Now, we've got 2 components of rarity, one might say. First of all, I've already emphasized, this took place, this last week took place in December. That's not April and May and June. That's when the tornadoes come. And also extraordinarily severe. I mean, it's unbelievable the extreme extent of the damage. Like that candle factory in Mayfield, Kentucky. How anybody survived, got out of that alive is beyond me. It's just total destruction. So you see a pickup truck stacked up, one on top of the other. Just incredible. But here's the thing. This is a very, very unusual, can we expect this in the future, people ask? Very unusual because of when it took place and how severe it was. And we attribute this in climate change, climate scientists attribute this in part, of course, it's been enhanced by global warming. Because global warming gives us more heat, more evaporated moisture. The ingredients necessary for severe thunderstorms and tornadoes are increased by global warming. So it's enough said. What I'm going to conclude with this political appeal. we need to use this out of respect for how many thousand people had their homes destroyed, not just those who had relatives killed or injured severely, but how many people lost their homes, lost their businesses, lost their jobs. This was really a catastrophe. I remember the 1974 tornado outbreak was estimated to have cost $4.5 billion, close to $5 billion in damage. This one here this week, I would say 10, 15 billion at least. I mean, these are expensive. And the real cost, of course, is in the deaths and the injuries and the lost careers, the lost jobs, and people thrust into poverty and homelessness. It's just so tragic. But we've got to use this to get the legislation to combat climate change, to mitigate global warming. We've got to get the legislation passed. And out of tribute, respect for all the people who lost so much, we need to do this. We need to do this as a country. And I strongly appeal to all of you to do what you can to get this through. I mean, what wasn't done this time, and there was a tremendous amount that wasn't done. And of course, India threw, so some of you who are informed about the conference, India threw in a monkey wrench regarding coal at the end, but we went along with it just to keep them in the game. But we've got to address this. This climate change, global warming is a serious, perhaps one of the, maybe the most serious threat to human existence on this planet. Maybe extinction. If we don't get smart about this, extinction is not going to be something that just applies to the dinosaurs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Don't tell me I was on mute the whole time.
No.
We heard you.
Wow. So how about some questions or comments?
Well, if I might, Julie.
Yes.
I just want to remind our folks to use the reactions icon at the bottom of the screen to raise their hand. And when you click on that, the lower part raises your hand. And it puts it in a digital order so that I can call upon people in sequence. I think that's really important. And so please do that in all fairness. Hey, George, you've given us a lot to think about here. I want to remind people that Greg will be putting out an email in the near future with the link for this recording. And Dr. George Stone, I want to personally thank you for taking us through the sequence of weather and how this all comes together. I think that's so important. I really recommend that people go back and look at this recording again once it's out there with the link from Greg. So thank you. And so we're going to begin discussion. A lot to talk about. Let's limit it to one question or one issue or one comment. Hey, Charlie.
Yeah, George, great job. Thank you for explaining how these tornadoes work. Very impressive. A couple questions here. One, do we have to worry about these kind of massive tornadoes in Wisconsin? It sounds like you suggested that they would stay further south, although we get some small ones up here every once in a while. But what if the atmosphere is starting to, I don't know, shuffle itself around? I mean, is this something we would have to worry about? And secondly, you know, people talk about, well, we want to rebuild and where our town is going to come back and everything's going to return to normal, but maybe not. I mean, what if these things are really and truly part of the new normal? And, you know, there's no kind of construction that can resist this kind of tornado. I mean, there were brick walls that got blown out.
Yeah.
So how do you build to survive a tornado event like the one we just witnessed? It seems almost impossible.
Well, that may well be, Charlie, that if you have a 200 and F5 tornado with 200-mile-an-hour winds and blowing trees and cars around like leaves, nothing's going to withstand that. But of course, the probability of that in your location, wherever that might be, is very low. You know, it's the probability, the risk is going to increase with global warming. That's true, but it's still relatively low. So you have to build, you have to have houses, and the probability of your being subjected to an extreme tornado is low. Yes, the so-called twister belt or tornado belt has shifted somewhat. It used to be centered over Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma and Kansas, and you know, Dorothy was back in Kansas with the tornado, but seems to be shifting. One aspect of the weather that I didn't mention is the jet stream and polar wandering, not polar wandering, but the polar thrust that's been happening in recent years, where the cold air comes down more rapidly, and it's the jet stream, the high-speed winds in the upper atmosphere that control the movement of the storms. So that's a factor that we need. Yeah, I think the frequency of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes will increase, and therefore the risk anywhere. Now, you asked about Wisconsin. I mentioned that in the 1974 outbreak, one town or city really that received the most damage was Xenia, Ohio. Well, that's Ohio, you know, that's a Midwestern state. And so we've had tornadoes in Wisconsin. Certainly the likelihood, the probability will increase with global warming, even though it's lower here than in other states.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, George. Eugene.
Yeah, 65% of my advocacy time is with mental health services. And just today, we had a 3-hour video conference call with the Milwaukee County Mental Health Task Force. One of the charts showed how the anxiety rates are going up and causing, obviously, we need more services because more people are suffering with mental health problems. There are two issues here. The environmental problem itself causes anxiety, but also, especially in children, just talking about it and seeing the news is increasing the anxiety level of children. So I'm just saying that we need to be careful who we talk to. I saw the note about what the zoo is doing in Kenosha or Steam, whatever it was. I would be totally against it. If you would sit down and see what's going on in the elementary school grades and with mental health issues, we cannot scare kids anymore. There's enough with the shootings. There's enough with the news when they see the results of a tornado in Kentucky. They don't know how far Kentucky is from here. They're thinking, oh, wow, around the corner, we may have a tornado like that. And it scares younger children. We've got to be a little more discreet, and we also need to get more people involved, which is very difficult. If I had a meeting, getting back to George Martin, a lot of people are at the Working Families meeting tonight. I know people who are involved with the environment.
Thank you, Eugene. To the point, please.
So we need to be careful about how we phrase it, who we phrase it to, and how we advertise it.
Thank you, Eugene. George.
I understand what you're trying to say, I think. I don't agree with it. I don't think we want to tailor our education. What we want to do, and I'm a scientist, which means I study nature. What we want to do is explain it in a non-scary way. Don't blame us because the media depend on ratings dollars and exaggerate everything. They're the ones who are scaring people, not the scientists. And I refuse to have my teaching, my content adjusted in order to not scare people. That's nonsense.
Oh, I agree. That's what I'm saying. We have to be careful and do it like that.
Okay. Thank you.
That's difficult.
I hope I didn't scare anybody here tonight. If you want to be scared about the political developments in this country. We're about to lose our democracy.
Yeah.
And if you should pay attention to this January 6th Commission investigative hearings, the knowledge, the information that's coming out about the extent of this insurrection is really scary. And so if you want to be scared, Eugene, I think you should be scared by the politicians that somehow 1/3 of the population of this country voted for. That baffles my mind. You know, I was born in 1936 during the Depression. I grew up during World War II. I had a half nephew who was killed in northern Italy in the 10th Mountain Division. I was proud of my country after World War II. We defeated the Nazis, those purveyors of, those fascists, those purveyors of bigotry and racism. I'm not proud of my country anymore. Actually, I'm quite ashamed. 74 million of my fellow citizens voted to re-elect this obviously racist, evil, incompetent person, Donald Trump. 74 million voted for him after 5 years of learning about it. And almost all of them white too. That really hurt me. And at 85, I don't feel very good about my country anymore. And I'm sorry to say that, but I think it's serious enough. If you want to be scared, Eugene, be scared by the fascists who are trying to take over our country.
Thank you, George. And as moderator, I just want to stress the point that we do not want to go back and forth in terms of the questionnaire and the person responding. We have a lot of people on the stack, and in all fairness, I think, Terry, are you next or is it Bruce?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to inject a note of hope here that I like to look at the destruction that occurred in so many places in Kentucky and elsewhere as opportunity. There was a town in Kansas that about 15 years ago was destroyed by a tornado, and appropriately enough, it was named Greenberg, and it was rebuilt with completely new outlook on things and built to withstand tornadoes and built with a lot of green infrastructure and ways of doing things. So there's another side to these things.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for the uplifting here. Jan.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Stone. I'm always interested in your viewpoints. Do the scientists, is the consensus that we can actually reverse these effects of climate change? Or are we just going to, the best we can hope for is to be put in a holding pattern that things don't get any worse than they are now?
Probably the latter. And if we get into a holding pattern at a low enough temperature increase, then the changes will not be probably unbearably severe. But if we don't hold it, now the target is 1.5 degrees Celsius average increase worldwide. We're now at about 1.1. A bad result would be an increase in average temperature of 2 degrees Celsius or even more, 2.5. This could lead to catastrophic results. And bear in mind, the source of life on this planet is the greatest diversity of life is in the ocean. The most diverse ecosystem within the ocean are the coral reefs. They're in serious trouble because two things are happening, of course. The ocean's sea surface temperatures, SSTs, are rising, so that it's getting warmer. And the coral reefs depend on the algae that live on them, the zooxanthellae, because that's what the corals feed on. Having more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means there's more CO2 dissolved in the ocean, and CO2 and water make carbonic acid. So dissolving more CO2 in the ocean lowers the pH, makes the water more acidic, and that puts the zooxanthellae and the coral under greater stress, higher temperature, lower pH. And so this is the ultimate source of life on this planet, the oceans. this should be very scary if you have any comprehensive, integrated knowledge of how nature works. And you know, that's what we're up against, and that's what we need to prevent.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, George. Thank you, Jan. Julie.
About 3 months ago, we had a special program on our 350 meeting concerning how do you talk to children about this at all different levels. And Philip Chard, who is a very fine local psychologist, presented this program, and it's on our website where we have copies, recordings of all of our past meetings and speakers. And so you can just look up our 350 Milwaukee website and check into past meetings and look up Philip Chard on how to speak to kids about climate change. And I think that would answer a lot of your questions on that.
Thank you, Julie. We have Tom Siri next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. George, the best thing I heard you say is that they're meeting again next year.
Right.
That's a significant statement, because I think that, you know, says that nobody's giving up on this, on their negotiation level. And they've got a lot of negotiations to do. It's tough negotiations because there's too much at risk. So the thing that I mean, I was reading someplace else that Hurricane Ida went from a hurricane, Category 1 hurricane to a Category 4 hurricane in 1 hour.
Yeah.
And that's why it blew Los Angeles off the, Louisiana off the map.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do we, and we're up here in Wisconsin, but how do we educate those people in Kentucky and Louisiana? How do we somehow get them to stop voting for people who support climate change? And I realize what I'm saying is, how do we reach out to those other people in other states? And I guess that's the question.
Well, we need to do a better job in educating everybody with regard to natural disasters and threats. And I mean, climate change is a planetary issue. It's affecting everyone. And we need to do a better job educating everybody about the nature of our environment. That's the main thing. The trouble is, Tom, that those people you're talking about aren't motivated to vote by what they think about climate change. They're motivated to vote because they're racist, and Donald Trump tells all this bad stuff about immigrants, you know, those murderers and rapists, and they're anti, they're white power people, most of them. They won't admit it, but they're white racists. And that's what they vote on, not on climate change.
That's true.
I say to hell with them, and insofar as possible, ignore them.
All right, George. Hey, I want to jump in here, Tom. And, you know, both of us having worked the congressional side, we know that if you're not a constituent of somebody in Ohio or Pennsylvania, they don't give a damn about us. Now, that's a reality. And so to me, it comes down, if you want to hit that hot, it's in some way figuring out how politically you can support local organizations contrary to that person's position, you know, and I beyond that, I just know that reality in terms of who they respond to in different states. Hey, Greg, is your name George too?
Hey, Georges. Good to see all the Georges here. You know, my son has 3 Uncle Daves. We've got 3 Georges on this meeting. Anyway, inertia and rate of change. Both, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of inertia built into the climate, and the rate of change is increasing. How well do the models that are currently being used to predict the future reflect that? Because I know the rate of change definitely has been a surprise to a lot of climatologists.
Yeah, that's true. One of the principal lines of evidence that established the cause of the measured increasing temperature came from modifying the computer models by adding greenhouse gases. And then you see what the effect was by a certain amount of greenhouse gas, whether it be carbon dioxide principally, or methane, which Gene loves, or others. You just modify your models and see how the increase in greenhouse gases affects the temperature increase. And there are other factors, not just greenhouse gases. I mean, there are particles in the air. They have the opposite effect. They shield the sun. But you put in all the known factors that influence the atmospheric temperature, and then see how well that computer model predicts the actual increasing temperature over the decades of the past century. This is what, in the 20th century, this is how Michael Mann really made his reputation. He did a lot of the integration, bringing in temperature curves from many different sources. And he became known as the hockey stick guy, because his temperature curve for the 20th century was fairly flat, and then toward the end started rising very rapidly. And in the shape of a hockey stick, the curve was going back into the 19th century. And so that's the hockey stick man. But we can test, here's the point I wanted to get to. The temperature increase with greenhouse gases added into the computer model quite accurately predicted the measured temperature increase. If we left those out, didn't predict it at all. The temperature curve was much flatter. So this was kind of indirect evidence that greenhouse gases were a major factor in increasing the temperature, the global temperature.
Thank you, George. Hey, thank you, Greg. Greg, you win the Deep Question of the Night award here. As I'm looking at this screen, the seriousness on all of our faces. During your question and during George's response, it was like, oh yeah, this is it here. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, George. We got about 10 minutes left here. And Eugene, you're up next.
Yeah, I want to echo what you said, George, about the politics in this. Almost immediately, because some Democratic members of Congress said, gee, these tornadoes are being caused by global warming, the Republicans came out and said, see, the Democrats are politicizing it. And I mean, you can't win. So you're correct, George. There's no doubt about it. How do we shut their mouths is the real issue.
I'm going to stick with reality, Gene, and expose their nonsense by simple, rational explanations. We just hang in there. Eventually, the truth will out, Gene. I have that much faith.
Well, thank you, Eugene. Thank you, George. We've got Julie, then Charlie. Julie.
So, George, I'd like to ask your opinion on the fact that hundreds and hundreds of corporate fossil fuel lobbyists are allowed into these meetings, these COP meetings, every single time. There were 502 corporate lobbyists this year at the COP26, at a time when so many of the people from other third world countries were not able to be there and be represented. And I understand that over and over again, it's these corporate lobbyists that sit in on these meetings and are able to water down any of the proposals and put a clamp on a lot of progress. Could you comment on this, please?
I wouldn't overgeneralize. They may sit in on a lot of meetings. Whether or not they have any significant influence depends on the nature of the other delegates at the meetings. You get into the area of censoring assembly, you know, or censoring participation in conferences, and that's a very, very sticky thing. Truth will out. The evidence regarding the negative impacts resulting from global warming, yeah, and how come ExxonMobil and Shell aren't paying for all this tornado damage? I think this latest outbreak will be at least $10 billion. We have trouble. It's better to bring your arguments and put them in the ground. I mean, they are so irrational and not obvious capitalists trying to increase profits at the extent of people. I think we've got such strong cases that we can withstand whatever BS they present at these meetings.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, George. Hey, Charlie.
George, do you think that perhaps because the Build Back Better bill is in the Senate right now and it's sort of hung up on those two Democrats, you know, Sinema and Manchin, might this tornado, I don't know, kind of encourage, let's say, a few Republicans to come in and vote for this Build Back Better bill to move it through? Because there's some pretty good climate change features in that bill, as I remember, right?
Absolutely. I agree completely, Charlie. And I think we should, as I said earlier, pay respect to all those who were hurt by this outbreak by using it to push through that legislation which addresses climate change. Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely. That's okay. That's the main take-home message for me is if you are disturbed by the incredible damage done by this tornado outbreak, then do everything you can to get the Senate. Of course, it comes down to Manchin and the Senate. It's a frustrating situation. We need to get rid of the filibuster. That's what we need to do.
Yeah. So do you think it's impossible that any Republicans would vote for the Build Back Better bill? I mean, if we had a half a dozen Republicans, it would cruise right through, right? Even
well,
just
you need 10. You need 10 to get by the filibuster. We've got 2, of course, but it remains to be seen if we can get. We don't even know if we've got all 50 Democratic senators.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Thank you, George. I want to jump in with a time check. We've got about 4 minutes left here. And Julie, I don't know how much time you need to wrap up, but anyone have an impending question for George while we have this moment? And I just want to take this moment. We can't listen to George all night and see Eileen sitting next to him. Hello, Eileen. Anybody on the stack?
Yeah, George.
Yeah, you got it, Tom.
Okay, so I take George's point exactly that the forces that want to quiet the issues of climate change go into those meetings, and so what I would suggest we need to look at is if there's a way, for example, of getting 350 on the national level to get their people and their scientists to go to this next meeting and to keep on going. And so we need to get behind our organization so that, and whether we got to each kick in $10 so that our leaders can go into those meetings and do civil disobedience or whatever they got to do in order to get the rest of those nations and their leaders to hear. So I guess what I want to suggest is that somehow or another we need to put pressure on our national organization to make, I assume they had some people there, but probably not enough. And maybe what we need to find a way of doing is getting more of our people to go to this thing or something.
Yeah. Well, let's communicate with Bill McKibben. He was at the Paris meeting. I rode on a bus with him. But, I'm not sure. He doesn't seem to be a very strong fan of this COP system. He says in fact, he had an article says that it's a fantasy to believe that governments are going to solve this problem. We've got to do it ourselves. Well, of course, he's promoting 350.org, and his motives are not altogether altruistic.
Yeah.
But in any case, for example, here at the Sustainability Summit, which we had for 15 years, Jim Hansen came here twice free of charge. Oh, wow. Michael Mann came here 3 times free of charge. Bill McKibben came once for $5,000, and he refused to come without the honorarium. So I wasn't 15,000? 15,000, Eileen says. I wasn't that impressed by his motives. Now, not that I am justified, but that's my experience. And but anyway, I think if you want to get 350 national action, you got to go through McKibben and get him to do it. And we can certainly, I think that's a great idea. You can do it. Yeah, do it.
Hey, George, and I see Julie on the stack, but I'm going to take the bully pulpit here because, Tom, you've raised an issue that I've had concerns about. Coming out of the peace movement, which has been more democratic and from the bottom up, and dealing with 350 structure, which really doesn't communicate with us beyond this is the campaign. You know, I don't know if this is the moment. I don't know if this is the battle. But I've been very disappointed in terms of democracy within 350. And I think this is something for a future discussion. Hey, Julie, time's a ticking. I'm handing it over to you.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's time to wrap up, folks. Just on this note, though, McKibben, I think, has been at all of the conferences. He was at this one in Glasgow. But there were tens of thousands of activists out in the streets in Glasgow, and many of them were the young people. And so that is what made an incredible impact on the media and on the people inside the conference, or the huge numbers demonstrating in the streets for some real serious action. So there are a lot of activists that do show up at this event, and they will continue to, I'm sure. So let's just remember what Michael Komba talked about earlier, that he's doing this action on Tuesday, the 21st of December, which is the solstice, and the winter solstice. And it's going to be at the Chase Bank on Water in Wisconsin at noon, where he's going to go inside and risk arrest, and is asking for people to support him. So we already had a bunch of people saying, yeah, we'll be there, we'll be there. So don't forget to support Michael on that, and we thank him. Could someone from our committee, our program is going to be next month? Greg, do you have that? Whoop.
Maybe Chris should. Chris Meyer contacted.
I'm trying to unmute. Yes, Representative Neubauer, she's going to tell us about her hopes and her plans for the coming session in the State House. And so I'm all excited.
Yeah, and she's one of the leaders in this issue in Madison, in the state legislature. So, okay, we'll be seeing you then. Have happy holidays, everyone. And I think for the next 2 weeks, well, let's see, Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve days, we will not be meeting at the Chase Bank. Take a little time off to party, have a good time with our family and friends.
Okay.
But we will be there this Friday.
Yeah.
Have some joy in your life, okay? So thank you everyone for doing this.
I love your Christmas ornaments. Yeah.
Julie, we will be there this Friday, though. You should.
Oh, but this Friday we will. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll also
one more Friday.
Good. All right, everyone. Happy holidays.
Okay.
Happy holidays.
Good meeting, family.
Yeah.
Be safe, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for coming and for participating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George.
Everybody.